Well, in this video we're going to chase some giant flathead along these flats and around these edges of these mangroves, and we're going to be using the new Storm Arashi glide bait. Glide baits for big flathead have become a bit of a fashionable rage in the last couple of seasons, and this latest released big glide bait by Storm is a killer on them. Let me show you how I like to fish it and the type of gear that I use. I'm going to just keep the camera rolling for the next sort of 10 or so minutes and go through some of the retrieves and hopefully get onto a real big one. I'll take you through the specs of this thing and what sort of sets it apart from a lot of other glide baits. These things have only just sort of hit the market really in the last few months. I saw them at AFTA this year and got to play with them in the tanks there at the Rapala tank. But some of the things you'll notice when you pull it out of the pack, it comes with a spare tail, which is great because sometimes these tails get ripped apart or they come out with all of the long range casting and things that you do and ripping it into sandbanks and things, and they can get scuffed up by the really big fish. So it's good to have at least one of these spare tails. This is a slow sinking glide bait and I'll show you how that works in a sec, but it comes with one of these attached clips, which I just get rid of those. So I probably wouldn't even bother using that, and I just tie it with a loop knot with my fluorocarbon. The way that I fish it is with fairly heavy line, to be honest, because these glide baits are fairly expensive. These are one of the more reasonably priced ones in the stores, and they've still got some great design features about them. Like, you're not cutting corners with these things, but I just tie a loop knot to the toe point instead of using one of those clips, only because I don't really have a lot of confidence in a lot of the clips out on the market. Alright, so that's 20-pound FC Rock by Sunline, and I've just tied that little loop knot there. You can see the design features on this, like the finish straight away is just really good, really high-end finish. It's almost clear, but it's got that excellent attention to detail in the coating on the outside, and being a glide bait, it's just got that single join. You might notice once you grab this thing and play with it, it's got swiveling hook hangers. You might be able to see that there, which really helps with the just keeping the fish on, so they can't sort of leverage their way off it when they start fighting and rolling and death rolling at flathead are notorious for like rolling a little bit or like really shaking about to try and leverage that hook out. So I think that's a great little design feature in this thing. I think I mentioned it's slow sinking. It's got a fairly big profile and presence in the water, which is great. This is like I think it's an 18 or 19 centimetre long lure. Yeah, it says 19 centimetres, 88 grams, and yeah, slow sinking. So I'll show you what that means and how to fish something like that. So I'm just fishing it with a swim baiting rod with a low profile bait casting reel. This is a Shimano Curado, and this is a Dobbin Fury series. It's a 795 SB, which is a swim baiting rod designed for throwing these things. So it's really heavy and really long, so you can get great big casts, and that's really what you're trying to do when you're fishing with big glide baits and swim baits, big stick baits for flathead. You need those long casts, and that gives you the chance to get in on top of those really big fish that are super wary and won't let you get anywhere near them usually. So yeah, almost 8 foot long this thing. So what I might do, the tide's just sort of coming in and filling up onto these flats. So I'll take you for a ride and you can just come along and I'll just talk you through how I like to fish it basically. You can fish these things in like any sort of depth because they're so slow sinking. And big long casts out there onto the edges of these weeds. Well, I can see it because I've got my Polaroid sunnies on, but you might be able to pick up, there are some sort of weed beds there, and you're trying to get on the edge of those or bring it between them. And you're trying to get distance away from your boat and keep that stealth going so that you're not spooking those really big fish that are out on these flats. And on a filling tide, I reckon the bigger flatheads start to move up onto the edges. So that's why I'm sort of fishing up onto the edge and not just sort of fan casting out through the channel or anything like that. And one of the key things you want to go looking for as well is really just the bait. If you can see bait around scooting on the flats, getting busted and shunted up around on the flats, or if you can see pelicans around, that's a really good sign that you're in the right sort of zone. So you want to try and steer clear. You can see I caught some weed there. I've just got a little bit close to that edge. So you're trying to get as much distance as you can. It's probably a little bit over 30 metres out there. And then all I do is that big slap on the surface, which you might have heard, that's fantastic for these big flathead. They love that. It's very natural to hear that on the surface for a big flathead with all the mullet jumping around and that sort of thing. Now the key to this is not to go too fast. With a big lure, often it's kind of like you want to reel it and feel it and get it coming in and swimming and watch it and that sort of thing. But really these big flathead are super wary and they'll come up and watch something and take a while to make their decision. So I really just do like half turns of the handle and I'm just watching that line like you would in a, when you're fishing for bream, for any little tick or take or anything like that as the glide bait's sort of falling back down. And a glide bait that's well balanced, these Arashi glides are fantastically balanced. As it falls down and then sits on the bottom, it won't roll over and fall into that side position. It tends to kind of like just nose down and then just sit there. And so that super slow sink that it's got is really appealing to allow a flathead to come up and make its decision. So you can see that you can get a huge distance even with a bait casting setup. You can get out 30, 40, even longer meters out away from the boat and onto these flats. And then all it is little just half turns. There's some bait there now. Just little half turns of the rod. You're wanting to give it as much time to sink down as possible. And if a flathead comes along and has a go at it and misses it, which that can happen, like it's a really big bait, it's only got 2 trebles on it, it's not about striking and ripping it away from it and then reeling it in. The flathead will come back. Often they'll come back for a second go, even if they've felt a little bit of the hooks or they've crashed up against the big bait. Often once they've revealed themselves with these big glide baits, they're still going to come back, come around. It might even take, half a minute or a minute for them to come around, get their confidence back, eye it in and crack it again. Right, we've come down here now to the bottom end of the system to try and chase some tidal movement. There's not a lot happening further up now and the sun's a bit higher in the sky, so I've decided to change out of a surface lure and throw on my glide bait again. And I've just come to this area where it's just funneling onto a flat. Main system. I reckon there's got to be some feeding fish sitting here. Right at the head of this, right at the pointy end. Where are you, big girl? Oh, I just got it. Come on. On the flat. Yep, yeah, now I got it. Oh, it's a beast. Oh, look at it. Yeah, that's what you come here for. Look at the size of that. Oh, yes. Oh, it's a giant. Not happy. Look at him. So it's important that you sort of try and hit specific zones where you're confident so you can slow down and fish it properly. And look, there's a variety of ways that you can fish this thing. You might be able to see it coming in now that you can fish it with an S and sort of S wave it in, but and that's like a constant retrieve. But the most effective way for me that I've found with these big flathead and these glide baits is a big cast out, that huge water disturbance, the ripples sort of pour out away from the lure, and you're trying to just keep in touch with it, so that if it gets picked up from that initial drop, you're in touch with it and you feel a hit. But from there, it's just little kinks of the rod, or like little half winds, and that's going to shoot your lure off in a faded direction like that. And then the next one is like kink, kink, and fades it off, and you want to give it all that time just to slowly sink. It's a super well balanced and weighted lure, this thing. And so you can give it 15 seconds to stop and it'll just slowly fade, perfectly balanced like a mullet, all the way back down to the bottom. I'm sort of seeing bait moving and scooting around the edges of this bank as we're cruising up, which is a really good sign to me. One of the things I think when you're getting into this style of fishing, you start to upgrade all your gear. You get yourself a swim bait set up, you buy these bigger lures, and because you're chasing these really big fish, you might go for a heavier drag, and I think it's a mistake to go and do that straight up. The way that I fish these generally is with a much lighter drag setting than what I use for mangrove jack. I'm still running a 20-pound setup and a Shimano Curado with Carbon-Tex drag, but I'm running super smooth and fairly light drag. Almost what you would have, I'd say, with like 6 and 8 pound gear, more like what you might tune up for like 8 pound line. You're not trying to really, rip into these flathead. When you hook a big flathead on the flat, you finally get one after all those casts and smashing yourself with throwing big lures all day. You don't want to pull the hooks out on it because your drag's too tight. Because often when they grab these things, they won't grab it clean and they won't have it in their mouth. They'll have it, a scratching and scarring attached to the outside of their face. And so it's very easy to pull the hooks on these big fish. So a lighter drag where you can just be patient and play that big flatty into the boat, or even better, up onto a bank somewhere, is the way to go. Because they go on these massive big runs, like some of them 50-metre runs, no problem at all. And there's a lot of torque and power in these flathead. They're super fast off the mark, and a too tight a drag or a sticky drag could be your undoing. I've come through this little creek section and I'm actually drifting in with the tide, and usually what I'd like to do is be bringing my lure back with the tide, because the flathead, the way they lay, is facing into that tide, and as the bait comes down, that's a way more natural presentation. But just at the moment when I'm coming in here, I don't want to spook fish with my boat by driving through first over this tiny little creek and these real shallows. So I'm just having a go with the lure first, and once I get to the end of it, I'll turn around and come back up the side that I'm really, really keen on, and present it with a really natural approach, swimming it back with the tide. That's what you want to do if you can manage it. But if you don't have a swim baiting set up and you're wanting to give these things a try, you just have to throw it with a little bit more of a lobby cast, maybe with like a 5 to 8 kilo 7 foot or 7'6" spinning rod. That'd be okay, that'd be fine. And you've just got to sort of baby it through your cast a little bit more, and you won't be able to get the distance, but you can certainly find your legs with these things and start to work it and get a feel for these lures, even with a spinning outfit and like a 2500 size reel or something like that. I've got a 702 SF, a Dobbins Fury Series rod that I throw a lot of my glide baits on, and they're fine. You've just got to baby it and just be careful that you're not sort of like when you're loading up, you're ripping through. I tend to just pirouette a little bit more and lob her out there. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a couple of starting points as to how to work these things. Just be really patient. Slower is better, definitely better. And you're trying to use the fading action of this thing to get the interest from a big flathead. You want it looking like a dying mullet because that's what they're feeding on in these areas, or the slow moving mullet that are unaware. That's how you want to fish them. They're a lot of fun to fish and super effective on those really big flathead that can be that fish of a lifetime. Now, if you want to know more about how to fish with these glide baits, I've got Giant Flathead in the Shallows, my latest Kayaker's Guide DVD. It's also available as a digital downloadable film. And that in there has got some fantastic points on how to fish with big glide baits, and it shows you some of the action with some real giants. Those 80 and even bigger 90 centimetre fish taking big glide baits. So if you haven't seen that, make sure you get onto that. I'll put a link in the comments or the description below this video. The other thing I'd just say, with once you get these really big fish, the best way to go about handling them, I use a glove, and I generally try to get them into the bank. I'm not lifting them up into the boat if I can help it. I've got a big knotless mesh net, one of these Shimano Enviro nets, and my brag mat is just an RCD roller by Rapala. It's near the 90, it is. And I just sit that over the top of the fish. You can even do it in the water and get your measurement of the fish that way. Give you a look. It's up over that 600. Let's have a look. How big are you, girl? High 70s, it's probably 76, 77, somewhere around that. Oh man, love this. So yeah, as much as you can, limit the time that these things are out of the water. You certainly don't want to be gripping them with pliers in the mouth, and you know, you can use those lip grips, like you can use these lip grips, but they can punch with big holes in the fish's soft tissue around their mouth, which makes it a little bit harder for them to survive and breathe. So you got to know what you're doing with these things and be super soft when you're handling them. You're not sort of manhandling them and ripping them around when they're shaking their head and that sort of thing. So it's better off you chuck a glove on and hold it and you know, look after the weight of the fish with that second hand underneath it when you're handling it for a photo. All right, so hopefully that gives you some idea of how to fish for them, how to look after them, how to get onto your next big flathead. If you haven't tried glide baits for big giant flathead, give it a go. That's the Arashi Glide by Storm. How's this, Clay? Putting Angus onto some giants, mate.
Doesn't get any better.
What a beauty. Oh. Off you go, big girl. Off you go. Come on, I'll let you go. Oh. See you later, Croc.